The sun was shining brightly over the busy streets of Los Angeles, but inside one of the city's most famous upscale salons, the air was cool and smelled like expensive perfume and coffee. It was the kind of place where the floors were so clean they sparkled, and the mirrors were bigger than television screens. This wasn't just a barber shop, it was a sanctuary for the rich and the famous. People came here to be seen, to relax, and to feel like they were better than everyone else outside those glass doors. The stylists wore designer clothes, and the customers carried bags that cost more than a used car. It was a Tuesday, which meant the salon was packed with people trying to look perfect. In the middle of this fancy world walked a man who looked like he didn't belong there at all. He pushed open the heavy glass door, and a little bell chimed above him, but nobody really looked up. When they did glance his way, their eyes slid right past him, as if he were invisible. It was Keanu Reeves. Now, if you looked closely, you might recognize the face that has been in blockbuster movies for decades, but he wasn't dressed like a movie star that day. There were no flashing cameras following him, and there was no big entourage. He was completely alone. He was wearing a dark leather jacket that looked like it had been through a lot. It was creased and worn in, looking comfortable rather than fashionable. Underneath the jacket, he had on a simple t-shirt that looked a little faded and gray from being washed too many times. His jeans were loose and frayed at the bottom, dragging slightly over his old, scuffed boots. He hadn't shaved in a few days, so he had a scruffy beard that made him look tired. He also wore a dusty baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. He looked like a guy who had maybe been sleeping in his car or working on a construction site all morning. He looked like a man who just needed a break. Keanu walked slowly up to the long, glossy white desk at the front. He didn't walk with his chest puffed out or his head high. He walked with his shoulders slightly slumped, trying to take up as little space as possible. He seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Behind the desk sat a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a headset on her head. She was typing furiously on a keyboard, her long fingernails making a loud clicking noise. She didn't stop typing when Keanu stood right in front of her. She didn't say hello or offer a smile. She just kept staring at her computer screen, acting like he wasn't there. There were 3 other stylists standing near the desk, chatting and laughing. They were holding fancy cups of iced coffee and flipping through glossy magazines. One of them, a tall man with bleached hair, glanced at Keanu. He looked at the worn-out boots, then at the dirty jeans, and finally at the cap. The stylist didn't see a person, he saw a problem. He whispered something to the woman next to him, and she let out a short, rude giggle. Keanu stood there, quiet and patient. He wasn't looking at his phone, and he wasn't looking around with an attitude. He just stood there, waiting. He looked like a man who had learned a long time ago that getting angry doesn't fix anything. The salon was noisy with the sound of hair dryers blowing and upbeat pop music playing, but the area around the front desk felt strangely cold and silent. The tension was growing, but only Keanu seemed to not notice it, or maybe he just didn't care. He watched a young girl getting her hair dyed in the chair nearest to him. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her mother was sitting next to her, tapping away on her phone, ignoring the world. Neither of them looked at the man in the leather jacket standing by the door. Finally, the receptionist stopped typing. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh, as if she were the most stressed person in the city. She slowly turned her head toward Keanu, but she didn't smile. Her eyes scanned him from his boots up to his cap, and her expression didn't change. It was a look that clearly said, "You are in the wrong place." It was a look that judged his wallet before he had even said a single word. She didn't ask how she could help. She just stared, waiting for him to speak, or better yet, leave. She checked her watch, tapping her foot on the floor. The other stylists nearby stopped their giggling just to watch, curious to see what this homeless-looking guy wanted in their expensive salon. The judgment in the room was heavy. It was a thick fog of snobbery that hung in the air. But Keanu just stood there. He adjusted his cap slightly and cleared his throat softly. He wasn't used to this kind of atmosphere. He was used to movie sets where everyone is busy, sure, but people usually treat each other with respect. This felt different. This felt like a club that he wasn't allowed to join. He leaned in a little closer to the desk, speaking over the noise of a hairdryer that had just turned on nearby. "Hi," he said. His voice was low and quiet, very polite. "Excuse me." The receptionist raised one perfectly plucked eyebrow, looking completely unimpressed. She picked up a pen and tapped it on the desk, a clear sign of annoyance. She didn't care who he was, she only cared that he didn't look like he had enough money to be there. The contrast between the two of them was almost funny. On one side of the desk was a woman dressed in the latest fashion, worried about her manicure and her schedule. On the other side was a man worth millions of dollars, dressed in clothes he probably bought at a thrift store, simply wanting to get a haircut. But the world sees what it wants to see. They saw a man who looked like trash, and they treated him like trash. Keanu shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He thought about turning around and leaving. He thought about walking back out into the heat and finding a simple barber shop with a spinning pole outside where the guys talked about sports and didn't care what you wore. But he was already here, and he really just wanted to get his hair trimmed. He looked at the receptionist again, waiting for her eyes to meet his. "I was wondering," he started to say, his tone gentle, "if you have any openings for a haircut today." The way he asked was so normal, so human. It was a simple request from one human being to another. But in that room, on that marble floor, surrounded by mirrors and vanity, his request sounded like a nuisance. The receptionist let out another sigh, this one even louder than the first. She looked around the salon as if hoping someone would save her from having to answer him. The stylist smirked, enjoying the show. The air in the salon seemed to freeze as everyone waited to see how the VIP staff would handle this intruder. Keanu just stood there, hands in his pockets, unaware that he was about to teach them all a very expensive lesson about judging a book by its cover. The receptionist didn't even look up at him fully. She kept her eyes locked on her computer screen, as if the glowing monitor held the secrets to the universe. She let out a tiny, sharp breath of air, almost like a laugh, but meaner. It was the kind of sound people make when they are trying to tell you that you are wasting their time without actually using words. She tapped a long, red fingernail against the mousepad. "A haircut?" she asked, her voice flat and uninterested. She finally turned her face toward him, but she wasn't looking at his eyes. She was looking at the greasy stain on his t-shirt, right near the collar. "Yes, just a trim," Keanu said softly. He shifted his weight again, feeling a bit awkward. He wasn't used to begging for service, but he wasn't the kind of person to demand it either. He noticed a small piece of fuzz on his jacket and brushed it off. "I don't have an appointment, but I can wait. I have time." The woman stared at him like he had just asked to borrow $1 million. She leaned back in her expensive leather chair and crossed her arms. "Sir," she said, putting a lot of heavy emphasis on the word sir, making it sound like an insult. "We don't really do walk-ins. Especially not today." Today is, well, it's a very busy day for us. She waved her hand vaguely around the room, as if pointing to invisible crowds of important people. Nearby, the stylists were listening. They weren't even pretending to work anymore. A woman with very tall, blonde hair was holding a pair of scissors and pointing them at Keanu while she whispered to a co-worker. The co-worker, a man with tight-fitting pants and a colorful scarf, covered his mouth and giggled. It was a cruel sound. They were treating a grown man like a stray dog that had wandered into a fancy party. We are actually fully booked for the next few hours with our regular clients, the receptionist continued. She didn't say VIPs, but she didn't have to. The way she said regular clients made it clear that these were people who mattered, people who belonged there. People who didn't wear scuffed boots. Our stylists are very specialized. Their time is very valuable. Keanu just nodded his head slowly. I understand, he said. He didn't argue. He didn't say, but I'm Keanu Reeves? He didn't pull out a phone to show them his IMDb page. He just accepted the rejection. It was strange, but in a room full of mirrors, nobody was reflecting on their own behavior. They were too busy looking at themselves. The stylist with the scarf decided to join in. He walked a little closer, holding a comb, and looked Keanu up and down. Excuse me, he said, his voice high and nasally. We are actually preparing for a photo shoot later. We can't have anyone distracting the artists. He looked at Keanu's dusty jeans with a look of pure disgust. Dust from the street can be very bad for the equipment. It was a lie. It was a ridiculous lie. But he said it with such confidence that the other stylists nodded in agreement. Keanu looked at the man. He looked him right in the eye. For a second, the room got very quiet. The stylist with the scarf froze, maybe realizing he was being a bit too mean, or maybe just intimidated by Keanu's calm stare. But Keanu didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He just gave a small, sad smile. I'm sorry to hear that, Keanu said politely. I'll leave you to it. He turned around to leave. He was completely graceful about it. He hadn't made a scene. He hadn't shouted. He had just taken the abuse and accepted it. But the receptionist wasn't done. She felt like she had won some kind of victory. As Keanu turned his back, she decided to add one last sting. She leaned over the desk, her voice dropping to a loud whisper that everyone in the front area could hear. You know, if you really need a cut, there is a place around the corner. Well, it's more your speed. It's called Tony's $10, no appointment needed. I think they would be happy to help you there. The stylists burst out laughing. It was the punchline they had been waiting for. Tony's, the blonde stylist echoed, rolling her eyes. Yeah, definitely try Tony's. They were laughing at the idea of Keanu Reeves going to a cheap, discount barber shop. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. They were mocking a man who could buy their entire salon with the money he makes in a week, and they didn't even know it. Keanu paused with his hand on the door handle. He didn't turn around. He didn't tell them who he was. He just pushed the door open. The little bell chimed again, a cheerful sound that didn't match the heavy, rude atmosphere inside. As the door swung shut behind him, cutting off the sound of their laughter, the staff went back to their business. Inside, they felt good. They felt superior. They had protected their exclusive club from the riffraff. They high-fived each other and went back to sipping their iced coffees, bragging about their weekend plans. They had no idea that they had just made a huge mistake. They had no idea that the man with the worn-out jacket was more of a star than anyone who had ever sat in their leather chairs. They just felt powerful, unaware that the real VIP was walking down the street, head held high, while they were left behind in their empty world of vanity. The glass door closed, and the world inside went back to being shallow, completely unaware of the opportunity they had just thrown away. Outside, the city noise was loud and chaotic. Cars honked, and people rushed past, each focused on their own lives. The sun beat down on the sidewalk, warming Keanu's shoulders as he walked away from the glass doors of the salon. He didn't look back. He didn't kick a rock or mutter to himself. He just kept walking, one boot in front of the other, hands deep in his pockets. He seemed completely at peace with the world, despite the rudeness he had just faced. He was thinking about maybe grabbing a coffee or just taking a long walk to clear his head. The cold air and the mean looks from the receptionist were already fading from his mind, replaced by the warmth of the sun. Inside the salon, however, the mood was very different. The staff was still buzzing with their own self-importance. The stylist with the scarf was leaning against the counter, laughing as he mimicked the way Keanu had stood. "I mean, did you see that jacket?" he said, holding his nose as if he smelled something bad. He looked like he crawled out of a dumpster. The receptionist joined in, feeling proud of herself for being so clever. She had protected their exclusive territory from the riffraff. She felt powerful, like a guard at a castle gate. Just then, a door at the back of the salon swung open. A man walked out. He was wearing a suit that was even more expensive than the receptionist's, and he carried himself with an air of authority. This was the owner of the salon. He was a man who spent his whole life chasing fame and money. He knew every celebrity face in the city, not because he cared about them, but because having them in his chair was good for business. He was always checking his phone, looking at paparazzi photos, and making sure his salon was the place to be. He walked up to the front desk, looking annoyed. He looked around the room, checking the chairs. "Who is that VIP client I heard was coming in?" he asked the receptionist sharply. "Is someone important waiting?" The receptionist shook her head, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "No, just some random guy," she said dismissively. "He wanted a walk-in. Can you believe it? I sent him away. He looked like a mess. I told him to go to Tony's down the street." The owner frowned. He walked over to the large glass window to look out at the street. He didn't care much about random people, but he liked to know who was in the neighborhood. He put his hand up to his forehead to block the glare from the sun and squinted. There, walking slowly down the sidewalk, was a figure in a worn-out leather jacket and a baseball cap. The owner watched him for a second. The man walked with a specific kind of rhythm. Even in the baggy clothes, there was something familiar about the set of his shoulders. Suddenly, the owner froze. His eyes widened. The coffee cup he was holding almost slipped from his hand. It hit him like a bolt of lightning. The walk. The hair peeking out from under the cap. The quiet, humble way he carried himself. It wasn't just some random guy. It was him. It was Keanu Reeves. The color drained from the owner's face. He felt a cold chill run down his spine, despite the warm afternoon. His mind started racing. He realized exactly what had just happened. His staff, the people he paid to be professional and polite, had just turned away one of the most famous and beloved actors in the world. Worse than that, they had been rude to him. They had treated him like trash. And Keanu Reeves was known for being one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. The owner knew how fast bad news traveled. If this got out, if Keanu told the story of how he was treated, his salon's reputation would be ruined in a day. Panic set in. The owner didn't think. He didn't stop to grab his phone or fix his suit. He just moved. He bolted from behind the desk, nearly knocking over a display of expensive shampoos. "Get the door!" he shouted, but he didn't wait for anyone to answer. He ran for the glass exit. Inside the salon, the staff froze. They had never seen their boss move that fast. They looked at each other, confused. "What is he doing?" the stylist with the scarf whispered. But the owner was already outside. He burst through the glass door, the little bell chiming frantically as he shoved it open. He stumbled slightly on the sidewalk but caught his balance. He started running down the street, dodging tourists and people walking their dogs. "Sir!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Sir! Wait! Please wait!" Keanu, hearing the shouting, stopped. He didn't jump or flinch. He just calmly turned around. He saw the man in the expensive suit running toward him, looking frantic and out of breath. Keanu watched him approach with a curious look on his face, wondering what the problem was now. The owner finally caught up to him, panting heavily, sweat forming on his forehead. "Mr. Reeves?" he gasped, bending over to catch his breath. "Keanu. Oh my God, please wait." Keanu tilted his head slightly. He reached up and touched the brim of his cap. "Yeah," he said simply. "Did I forget something?" The owner stood up straight, trying to compose himself, but his hands were shaking. No, he stammered. I am so sorry. I just saw you leaving. Please, you have to come back inside. There has been a terrible mistake." Keanu looked past him, toward the salon. He saw the receptionist and the stylists pressed against the glass, their faces pale white, staring out in horror. It was clear to him that the owner now knew who he was. He could see the fear in the man's eyes. It wasn't a fear of safety, it was a fear of losing face. It was the fear of having messed up badly. "It's okay," Keanu said softly, his voice gentle. He didn't look angry. He actually looked a little amused. "I really didn't want to interrupt anyone. I can just go somewhere else. It's not a big deal." No. The owner insisted, his voice too loud. People on the street were starting to stare now. "It is a big deal. It is a huge deal. Please, my salon would be honored. We have a chair open right now. The best chair. Please, come back." Keanu looked at the man for a long moment. He could have kept walking. He could have told the guy to get lost and made a scene. But that wasn't who he was. He saw a man who was terrified and begging. He sighed, a small, almost invisible sigh, and nodded his head. "Okay," Keanu said. "If it means that much to you." The owner let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a year. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." He turned and began walking back to the salon, but this time, he didn't walk in front. He walked slightly behind Keanu, like a servant showing respect to a king. As they got closer to the glass doors, the owner's heart pounded in his chest. He knew exactly what was waiting for them inside. He knew that his staff was about to feel the most embarrassment of their lives. He watched Keanu's back as they walked. The actor looked so normal, so human. Just a guy in a leather jacket wanting a haircut. The owner felt a wave of shame wash over him. This was what success looked like when it was real quiet, humble, and kind. And inside that glass shop was a bunch of people pretending to be important, who had just failed the easiest test in the world: just be nice to people. When they reached the door, the owner reached out and opened it, holding it wide open for Keanu. The bell chimed again, but this time, nobody inside was laughing. The silence inside the salon was absolute. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The air was thick with tension. Every eye was glued to the door. The receptionist looked like she was about to faint. The stylist with the scarf had turned pale, his mouth hanging open. They all knew the game was up. They knew that the trash they had thrown out was actually the treasure they spent their whole lives trying to attract. Keanu stepped inside, the bell chiming one last time, and the reality of their mistake came crashing down on every single person in the room. The silence inside the salon was absolute. It wasn't a peaceful silence, it was the heavy, suffocating kind that happens when everyone in the room realizes they have made a terrible, irreversible mistake. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant traffic from outside, but inside, nobody dared to breathe. Keanu stepped through the door, the owner holding it open for him like a servant. As the bell finished chiming, every pair of eyes in the room was locked on the man in the faded jacket. The receptionist looked like she had seen a ghost. Her face had lost all its color, turning a pale shade of white. She was gripping the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles were turning white. Just 10 minutes ago, she had felt powerful and superior, looking down on him. Now, she felt incredibly small. The reality of who she had insulted was standing right in front of her, and the weight of it was crushing. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe an apology, but her voice caught in her throat. No words came out. The stylist with the tight scarf wasn't laughing anymore. He had flattened himself against the wall, trying to hide behind a shelf of overpriced shampoos. He was looking at his shoes, terrified to make eye contact. The irony of the situation was painful. These people spent their entire lives trying to get close to fame, trying to be around people like Keanu Reeves, and when the universe actually dropped him into their laps, they had treated him like garbage. The owner, still panting slightly from the run, clapped his hands together once, a loud, sharp sound that made everyone jump. He was in full damage control mode. "Okay, everyone," he announced, his voice a bit too high and frantic. "Let's get moving. We have a very special guest today." He gestured wildly toward the back of the salon. "Bring out the special chair. The leather one. The one by the window." The staff scrambled into action. It was chaotic and clumsy. One stylist nearly knocked over a tray of combs trying to move a plant out of the way. Another one ran to the back to fetch a bottle of water, spilling some on the floor in their haste. The atmosphere had shifted from icy judgment to frantic panic in seconds. They were terrified that Keanu would yell, or worse, walk out again. They were tripping over themselves to make up for their bad behavior. Keanu stood in the middle of the room, watching the chaos with a calm, steady gaze. He didn't look angry. He didn't have a smirk on his face. He just looked at them with a quiet sort of observation. He saw the fear in their eyes. He saw that they weren't sorry for being mean, they were just sorry they had been mean to a celebrity. If he were still just a normal guy on the street, they wouldn't care. He understood the game, and he didn't respect it, but he also didn't want to be the cause of a panic. He just wanted to get his hair cut. The owner rushed forward, pulling out a chair from the very back, a plush, black leather seat that looked like a throne. "Please, sit here," the owner said, gesturing to it like he was presenting a king with a crown. "This is our best seat. The most comfortable. The lighting is perfect here." Keanu looked at the chair, then back at the owner. "This one looks fine," he said, pointing to a normal, empty chair right next to him. He didn't want the special treatment. He didn't want the throne. He just wanted to sit down. The owner looked nervous but quickly nodded. Of course. Whatever you want." He snapped his fingers at the senior stylist, a man who had been watching quietly from the side with a look of shock on his face. "You. Do the cut. Your best work. Take your time." The senior stylist, a man with graying temples and a serious face, walked over. He seemed more respectful than the others, but he was still clearly shaken. He held up a cape, his hands shaking just a little bit. As he wrapped the black cloth around Keanu's neck, he was extremely gentle, treating the fabric like it was silk. I'm very sorry about the confusion earlier," the stylist whispered, leaning in close so only Keanu could hear. "We didn't know." Keanu looked at him in the mirror. Their eyes met. "It happens," Keanu said softly. "Don't worry about it." The stylist let out a breath of relief and began to spray Keanu's hair with water. Meanwhile, the receptionist finally moved. She walked over slowly, holding a glass bottle of sparkling water and a glass on a silver tray. Her hands were trembling so much the water was sloshing around in the glass. She approached Keanu as if she were approaching a bomb that might go off. She couldn't look him in the eye. She stared at his shoulder. "Here is some water for you," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It is imported." Keanu took the glass from her tray. He didn't drink it immediately. He looked at her. She looked miserable. "Thank you," he said. His voice was kind, but it wasn't warm. It was polite. It was the kind of kindness that makes you feel even worse when you know you messed up. The guilt washed over her face. She turned around and practically ran back to the safety of her desk, burying her face in her hands for a second. The salon was buzzing now, but in a weird, tense way. The other stylists were sneaking glances at Keanu in the mirror. They were whispering to each other, not making fun this time, but talking about how they couldn't believe it. They were pulling out their phones under the counters, trying to get a subtle photo, terrified the owner would see them but desperate to show they were in the same room as a movie star. Keanu sat there, staring at his own reflection. He looked tired. He watched the people bustling around him. It was sad, really. He saw how fake they were being. A few minutes ago, he was distracting and dirty. Now, he was a VIP. He hadn't changed. His clothes were the same. His face was the same. The only thing that changed was their knowledge of who he was. It proved to him, once again, that for many people in the city, status was everything. Human kindness didn't matter unless you were famous. The senior stylist started combing through Keanu's hair. "How would you like it today?" he asked, acting professional despite the tension. "Just a clean-up like usual." "Yeah, just trim it up," Keanu said, closing his eyes for a moment as the scissors snipped. "Keep it simple." The owner was hovering nearby, anxiously wringing his hands. He couldn't just stand still. He wanted to offer Keanu everything: free products, a facial, a massage. He wanted to buy back his approval. But Keanu just sat there, unbothered by the offers, shrugging them off with a simple "No, I'm good." It was a strange scene. The most powerful person in the room was the one in the worn-out jacket, sitting quietly with his eyes closed, while the people who owned the place were running around like scared chickens, begging for a second chance. They had treated him like trash, and now they were treating him like a god, swinging wildly from one extreme to the other, completely missing the middle ground where they should have been all along, just treating him like a human being. The haircut was finished. The senior stylist stepped back, wiping a tiny bit of loose hair from Keanu's neck with a soft brush. He held up a small hand mirror so Keanu could see the back of his head. "How does that look?" the stylist asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He was still nervous, afraid he might have made a mistake that would annoy the star. Keanu looked in the mirror. He turned his head from side to side, checking the lines. The haircut was clean and simple. It was exactly what he wanted. He nodded slowly and offered a small, genuine smile to the stylist. "It looks great," Keanu said softly. "Thank you. You did a good job." The stylist let out a huge breath, his shoulders dropping as the tension finally left his body. "Thank you," he whispered back, looking truly relieved. He was glad it was over, and glad he hadn't messed it up. As Keanu stood up from the chair and the stylist removed the black cape, the owner rushed forward again. He was ready to make his big, generous gesture. He stood between Keanu and the payment desk, waving his hands frantically. "Please, please, don't even think about it," the owner said, his voice loud and eager to please. "It is on the house. Absolutely free. It was an honor. A privilege to have you here." Keanu looked at him. He knew exactly what the owner was doing. The owner wasn't being generous because he was a nice person, he was trying to buy Keanu's silence. He was terrified that Keanu would leave and tell the world how badly he had been treated. If the service was free, maybe Keanu would forget about the rudeness. But Keanu wasn't interested in playing that game. He shook his head firmly. "No," he said. "I want to pay." The owner shook his head even harder, sweating a little. "No, no, I insist. We wasted your time. We were rude. It is the least we can do." "You didn't waste my time," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. He walked past the owner and stood in front of the payment terminal. "And I received a service. I always pay for services I receive." He pulled out a simple, worn leather wallet from his back pocket. It looked old and used, just like his jacket. He took out a card and handed it to the receptionist. The receptionist's hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She couldn't meet his eyes. She felt terrible. Just a little while ago, she had treated this man like he was nothing. Now, she was taking his money. She swiped the card, terrified she would make a mistake. The machine beeped, and she turned the screen toward him. The total for the haircut was on the screen. Keanu typed in a tip amount. It wasn't a small tip. It was a massive tip. The total on the screen made the receptionist gasp. It was more than the haircut cost. In fact, it was more than she made in an entire day of work. The owner leaned over the counter, his eyes popping out of his head when he saw the number. "Mr. Reeves, that is too much," he stammered. "You really don't have to do that." Keanu ignored him. He hit the green OK button with a firm press and took his card back. He put it away in his wallet and looked at the receptionist. She looked like she was about to cry. She felt so guilty. She had been mean, and he had just given her a huge reward. Keanu leaned in a little closer to her. He lowered his voice so only she and the owner could hear. "I know it was a busy day," he said kindly. "Sometimes people have bad days. It's okay. He didn't give a long speech. He didn't scold her. He didn't say, I forgive you for being a terrible person. He just gave her a way out. He told her it was okay, even though they both knew it wasn't really okay. It was an act of grace that was more powerful than any shouting match could have been. The receptionist finally looked up. Her eyes were wet and shiny. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. It wasn't just a thank you for the money. It was a thank you for not destroying her pride, even though she had tried to stomp on his. Keanu nodded at her, a simple, polite nod. Then he turned to the rest of the room. The stylists were all watching him. Their masks of cool professionalism were completely gone. They looked like little kids who had been caught doing something wrong. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't whispering. They were just standing there, feeling the heavy weight of their own behavior. Keanu didn't say goodbye to the room. He didn't wave or try to make a dramatic exit. He just adjusted his leather jacket, pulled his baseball cap down low over his eyes, and walked toward the glass door. The bell chimed again. The heavy door opened, and he stepped out into the bright Los Angeles sunshine, disappearing back into the real world. Inside the salon, nobody moved for a long time. They stood frozen, watching him through the glass as he walked down the street. He didn't look back. He didn't check to see if they were watching. He just walked away, hands in his pockets, looking like the same unassuming guy who had walked in an hour ago. The silence in the salon was heavier than before. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore, it was the silence of shame. The owner walked slowly back to his desk, looking exhausted. The stylist with the scarf took off the scarf and threw it on the counter, looking disgusted with himself. The receptionist wiped her eyes with a tissue, staring at the receipt with the huge tip on it. They had treated a man like trash because of how he looked, and he had treated them like gold because of who he was on the inside. It was a painful lesson for everyone in the room. They realized that while they were busy acting like VIPs, the real VIP was the guy who didn't even ask for a thank you. The owner let out a long, sad sigh and rubbed his face with his hands. The expensive salon, with its shiny mirrors and perfect lights, suddenly felt very empty and cold. No amount of money or fame could buy the class that Keanu Reeves had shown them that day. They stood there in the quiet, humbled and changed, watching the street long after he was gone, hoping they would never make the same mistake again.